take a break and get a snack or something like that, because this one's going to be longer than the rest of them. I was looking at some Tears of the Kingdom stuff, some Breath of the Wild stuff, just for funsies, just in anticipation of the game. And it started to click to me. Something very strange happened. And funny enough, it was on the kind of like doomsday trailer that they released for Tears of the Kingdom. And there seems to be some weird similarities, at the very least, some weird similarities between the Book of Revelations and Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. And when I looked into it further, there seemed to be some interesting comparisons with the Book of Genesis. And I know what you're probably thinking. It's like, I don't want religion in my game. Like I get it. I 100% get it. But this is nothing like that. There's just some interesting comparisons. And I'm wondering if we can use the Bible to actually help predict the end of Tears of the Kingdom or the Legend of Zelda timeline. So to give you like a brief overview for those not super familiar with the Bible, which I'm assuming you probably are to a degree, is the fact that it exists. There's the part of creation, or at least the Genesis. Genesis also means beginning. Your whole Alpha and Omega and all that other good stuff. Genesis is the beginning. And according to the Bible, God creates the world and everything in it, including humanity. And he gives humanity a special role and responsibility to care for the earth. And we know we don't do that too well. And to live in harmony with nature and everything else. And however, through sin and disobedience, humanity falls away from God and the world becomes broken and corrupted. And then if you talk about the Book of Revelation, God's plan, but God's ultimate plan for the world is revealed, and he's bringing judgment and redemption to the earth. The vision is supposed to be like a vision of like a new one, like a newly constructed one. Basically, it's just like bulldozing a building, and then just like, all right, we have plans to build a new one. We might break a few eggs in the interim, but we're still going to do that. In both cases, God, with Genesis and Revelation, God is portrayed as like the creator and the sustainer of the world, who has the power to bring about renewal and restoration. And I had to really go into this to make sure. I was like, wait, there is a connection between the Book of Genesis and the Book of Revelations, right? Like, okay. But we'll connect those, and then we're going to tie it back into the Legend of Zelda. Another connection between the two is there's supposed to be God's victory over evil. In Genesis, you have the serpent, which represents the forces of evil and temptation. The Adam, Eve. Well, I say but just in case anybody doesn't know, story of Adam and Eve. They live in a utopia. They get offered an apple. I think it's like the apple of knowledge. The snake is like, come on, do it. It's like the old drug ads, to where you have the guy in a trench coat trying to offer the kids like drugs, basically, like that kind of thing. And that's the snake in this. It's like, come on, Adam and Eve, don't you wanna? You'll be one of the cool kids and do that, right? Eventually they end up doing it. They lose their immortality. Oh yeah, they had immortality, flawed and all that other good stuff. They lose grace with God and they get kicked out. The serpent represents the forces of evil and temptation, and it draws humanity away from God. While in Revelation, you got Satan, which, there's a kinship there, allegedly. And his followers are depicted as the ultimate enemies of God's plan for the world in both cases. And God is portrayed as the ultimate victor who will overcome evil and bring about a new and a better world. Like I said, they're bulldozing the building and building up a new one on the Upper East Side. One connection is the theme of divine judgment. And in Genesis, God judges humanity for their sin and disobedience, leading to their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Revelation, God again judges. God does a lot of judging. If I was an all-powerful being, I don't think I would be as judgmental, because I know so much. Anything or anyone or any being can, quote unquote, be led astray. It's an environmental thing. All right, let me get off my soapbox. Let me get back into the storytelling. Back into the storytelling. But this theme of divine judgment is just a reminder of God's justice and holiness, and as well as the consequences of sin. Another connection is the idea of new creation, as I mentioned with bulldozing. In Genesis, God creates the world out of chaos and brings order and beauty to it. And in Revelation, God promises a new heaven and a new earth where there'll be no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more grief, no more scalpers. Uh, this new creation represents a restoration of the original beauty and goodness. But there's so many connections between the two. I find it super fascinating because that, to me, just to be honest with all of you, it really signifies, or at least I'm getting a strong inclination that Skyward Sword is the book of Genesis. Or, based on recent events, it could be after that. It could be after the book of Genesis. Because timelines and all that stuff is a bitch to try to put together with theoretical physics. We're just going to say that Skyward Sword is our book of Genesis. A 50-50 chance of that. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom possibly being the book of Genesis and the book of Revelations. Or at least regarding the Zelda time. And if you are confused, don't sweat it, because timelines, multiverse theory, all of that is a bitch. So if you're extremely confused, don't sweat it. Even me, when I explain it and I get it for the most part, it's still just going to be confusing in and of itself, because it may not even be actual physics. It's theoretical physics and all that other good stuff, as far as like time travel and multiverse and timelines and all that stuff. I also want to lay the groundwork just to be 100% sure that everybody knows that this is not trying to convert anybody into being religious or whatever, because I know people get super touchy about that. I'm simply just talking about the potential inspiration or the potential connections between The Legend of Zelda, and just anything in general, whether it be the culture, the religion, locations, all that stuff. Judeanity, is it Judy? No, Judaism, my bad, Judeanity, god damn it. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Shintoism, blah, blah, so on and so forth. And also warning too, there may be significant spoilers throughout me mentioning the connection with the Bible in the Zelda series. So be warned. I love your view and that will help me grow, but I don't want to screw up your day by spoiling something for you, because me personally, I fucking hate spoilers. I don't want to mess it up for you. Forewarning. Go hang out somewhere. Forewarning. All right. So now that we're 100% sure that this isn't some religious conversion tactic, which if it was, they would have to pay me. Anyways, it's so odd to me. Like, I was struggling to think about how to approach this, because it's somewhat of a touchy subject, but it's still pretty neat. And it's an interesting rabbit hole to jump down. I'm going to be going through every little instance that I can find. With the Bible, you've got the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I feel like there is if I'm not mistaken, there are some references in there to the Ouroboros. Christ is described as dying and being resurrected, which I feel like that's a potential connection to the Ouroboros, because Ouroboros is a symbol of death and rebirth. Like, it's this endless cycle of it. And I think that's one part. And in Ecclesiastes, a book of the Old Testament, the cyclical nature of life is explored through the famous phrase, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven." Like, you can make the case that the serpent in the Garden of Eden, for example, that tempts Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit of knowledge, King Rome. And you could make the case that the Ouroboros, in a way, could be the reason there are two dragons instead of one. Birth. There is a second dragon, death. The serpent has created the second dragon in man's world. If the serpent never offered anything, then Adam and Eve, by extension of humanity, would probably be immortal, which is still wild to me. But death was added to their life, and that would be like the second one, the second part of the Ouroboros, which It very well may be akin to what happened in Ocarina of Time to the Kokiri, or at least regarding Ocarina of Time and going into the Twilight Princess. In this timeline, the Great Deku Tree is dead, and the Dead Protector's immortal creating embrace is gone. Because as long as you didn't leave the forest, or so it's told in Ocarina of Time, you could, if you are Kokiri, you could remain a kid forever. But once you leave that embrace, they tell Link that, like, once you leave that embrace, you're no longer immortal. And the Deku was their Garden of Eden, of immortality and the Utopia, and it's pretty much wiped out in the Ocarina of Time's like adult era timeline, if I'm not mistaken. Another thing that I noticed too is you have centric circles as far as the reveal for Tears of the Kingdom. Like there's multiple circles repeating over and over and over and over and over and over again. I feel like that is a reference to Ouroboros because the Ouroboros is in the official, like, it's behind the Legend of Zelda name. So there's got to be a connection there. In Breath of the Wild, the Deku Tree is instead, or at least not like the Ocarina of Time counterpart, but it's a cherry blossom. And in Japanese culture, that's supposed to represent a life and death cycle. Like nothing is eternal and everything has to, unfortunately, there's an end to everything. Well, I don't know about the universe, but everything else within the universe, there eventually is an end. Even black holes. Black holes may live for, I can't even put a number to that. Like it's a Googleplex kind of number. Like it's fucking wild. But even those, even when everything else is gone in the universe, black holes will eventually teeter out. And in Breath of the Wild, the only other place where there's cherry blossoms to my knowledge, that's going to be Sarati Mountain or Saratori. I struggle to say that. The mountain with the really cool glowing horse god thing. Anyway, that's so terrible. Anyways, much like we don't know how the universe began, cultures and people use religions to bridge the gap and explain the unexplainable, not to discount them. I have no idea what is real and really what isn't regarding religion. And to keep it real with you, it's likely none of us do. But religion definitely helps bridge the gap. And in the Zelda religion, it is said that, or at least in Ocarina of Time, there are 3 goddesses descend onto the chaos that is Hyrule. And it's looking a little revelation-y when you first look at it in the Ocarina of Time cutscene. And it's chaotic in the trailer reveal for Tears of the Kingdom. The Zelda series already had more of a European feel to it, and look to it, which of course is Christianity focused country. The Zonai, like I've mentioned before, I feel like they were based off of the Aztecs and the Mayans, and to a lesser degree the Incas and the Olmecs, but argue to say Aztecs and Mayans, especially with the barbarian armor, are going to be like the lead references. The Europeans weren't too kind to the Mayans and the Aztecs, even though the Aztecs as a society were massive dicks. So the Zelda series and the Bible share these connections. Just to try to go even further, one can make a pretty stern case about a bunch of allegories alluding from Zelda to Christianity. But generally, a lot of the Abrahamic religions and faiths do share a connection with the Zelda games. You have the Sheikah Eye, which you could argue is a symbolism, is with heavy Christian overtones referring to gods and or angels. So for the Sheikah, I mean, in Ocarina of Time, I guess where there is a lens of truth that comes from, oh God, biblically accurate angels. That makes the butt tight. Anyways, there is arguably some of the strongest straight up this is Christianity inspired themes in Zelda 1, like the very first Zelda ever created. One of the most obvious ones is to have a crucifix seen in Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 in the form of Link's shield. The Book of Magic is titled Bible in the Japanese version. I mean, it's a dead... Or to play devil's advocate, no pun intended, it could also be, or at least the Sheikah Eye could be reference to a third eye opening, or it could be demonic related. Because again, King Rome was afraid of it. In the Adventures of Link, there is a cross item, I believe, there that makes another reference to Christianity. The promotional material for A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo basically had Link kneeling and praying before a crucifix, which depicted Jesus. Like, it's so blatantly obvious. Like, I don't know how you can say it's not. There is a monastery you really don't really see it in the other games, but definitely in Link to the Past, which is something because when I played it, I never really just thought about it. But yes, it has a church and a monastery, and it has definitely like religious overtones to it. You could argue to say that it had its like Book of Revelations in and of itself, or like hell or whatever with the dark world. And that probably deserves like a separate nod and a video in and of itself. But it's super interesting. If you haven't played Link to the Past, it's a classic banger. It's available on the online, like you can play if you have Nintendo Switch Online, you can just play it right now. And I extremely recommend it. Okay, Stunlock aside, there is a sub boss as I go through all these different Zelda games. There's a sub boss in the Arbiter's Grounds from Twilight Princess, the Death Sword. There could be a potential hidden link to Hyrulean history there as far as like a connection to the Bible. Going back to the Adventures of Link, there are graveyards that also have crosses on them, like just straight up crosses. There is another semblance of something, or at least as far as the Bible. When I think about the three goddesses that descend upon to Hyrule back in the Ocarina of Time cutscene, you could argue that it's the Divine Trinity or the Holy Trinity. And as far as the Bible's concerned, that would be the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because when you think about it, a lot of the language used as far as the creation of Hyrule shares an extremely interesting resemblance to the type of language that was used for the Book of Revelation. And in fact, like the Japanese version of the manual even has like the text, and it even translates to from Genesis. I believe there is, and I don't think it ever released to the States or North America, but I believe there's a Zelda game called BS The Legend of Zelda, which I think the translation is Inchi no Sekiban, which I believe translates to BS The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets. The stone tablets in Christianity are sacred artifacts, which, you know, if you're familiar with the story of Moses and the 10 Commandments, there's your stone tablets. And I know I mentioned that you don't see churches much in the Zelda series after Link to the Past, but you could argue that the Temple of Time really looks like a church, or it looks like a church from the Victorian era. Like, you can find examples of church architecture that really showcase, like, hey, yeah, the Ocarina of Time, I'm about to say Church of Time, but Temple of Time really bears a striking resemblance to Victorian era architecture. And another semblance that you could take from Ocarina of Time is if you go inside Jabu Jabu. Well, when you do, because you just have to. When you go inside Jabu Jabu's belly, there seems to be a parallel with Jonah and the whale story. Like, there's so many different connections that I really could go on all day, and I guess I probably should, because I'm already in for a penny. I don't necessarily plan on doing this over and over, because there's only so much connections that you can do. So I really should, and I'm going to flesh this out as much as I can on my own. So in Majora's Mask, the Composer Brothers, or there's Composer Brothers in Majora's Mask. The brother Flat I think this is brother Sharp and the brother Flat, references Christianity when he says, "Oh Sharp, my dear brother, he sold his soul to the devil and was the one who locked me in here. You have here the concepts of both the devil and souls," like, and the latter of which is one of the primary aspects of Majora's Mask. And More so, just the broader Zelda series. Like Souls is mentioned fairly often within the series. It isn't really exclusive as far as being a Christian thing or a concept, but it's still Christian related. Granted, I guess when you've been around for such a long time, it's almost an inevitability that a lot of things will cross reference with your source material, but it's still super fascinating to think about. So, in Wind Waker, there is a massive flood, Noah's Ark. Like, that's, I don't even have to go into extreme detail with that. A flood to wash away all the bad, a flood to wash away all the bad. Like, it's just bam, bam. It's pretty straight up. Uh, and you could also say that one's apocalyptic too, but I'm going to more so give that to Noah's Ark. It's just, when you think of water in the Bible, you think of Noah's Ark, really. And in going back to Twilight Princess, I believe there is a, God, I haven't played that game since it came out on the GameCube. That's how long it's been. So I'm trying to do all of this on memory. So please bear with me. And if you bear with me this long, shout outs. You're beautiful people. Thank you so much. Anyways, back to what you came here for. In Twilight Princess, I believe there is a baby in a basket floating down the river. And in the segment, I think it's near Ordon Village. And it was probably taken from, I think, Exodus. I couldn't tell you which. Is it 3-6. These passages have precedent as far as like influence in parts of Nintendo's titles, including, and here's an interesting aspect that you could take from it. The whole baby floating down like in a basket, that was also used for Mallow in Super Mario RPG. If you haven't played that game, absolute banger. Play the damn game. Find it online. I can't tell you where, but it's easy to find. Find that, find an emulator, and play it. So good. So good. The fact that it doesn't get more love and the fact that it is not Nintendo Online, it's actually a crime. But enough Stunlock once again. Let's keep going. So in Twilight Princess, and like I've mentioned before, potential spoilers. You've been warned again. I love you guys, so I don't want to screw you up. In Twilight Princess, there is a Christ-like way that Zelda sacrifices herself to save Midna. And I will say too, again, this comes with the whole cross-referencing something that's super old. Sacrifice is a pretty common theme in fiction in general. Oh shit, I said fiction. Anyways, it's a common theme in nonfiction, fiction and nonfiction. Let me be completely transparent on that. She makes a Christ-like sacrifice there. In Skyward Sword, you have the Levias, and it's probably based on Leviathan from Job 41, which I'll let you decide. If you want to go into detail and research that, I'll let you do that, because this is going to be fairly long. And I want to make it even longer. There are prayer features in many Zelda games. You have one of the songs from Wind Waker called Medi's Prayer. And I think you have Maker's Prayer. And in the game itself, like especially like Wind Waker, it's very prominent. Like people pray to the giants. I'm jumping around. So Majora's Mask. So in Majora's Mask, people pray to the giants. There's 4 giants over the town, or its protectors. And spoiler alert for Majora's Mask, they end up protecting the town from the psychotic, psycho, cracked out moon. That moon still gives me like slight PTSD. Anybody that's played Majora's Mask as a kid, I'm going to apologize to you on behalf of Nintendo. It does scar you. It will scar you. So play that game as an adult. Don't play it as a kid. It makes you extremely uneasy. Anyways, back to the Majora's Mask thing. So you've got that as far as people praying to the giants. You've got, I think Zelda prays for Link's journey to be a safe one. I'm trying to remember in which game that would be in. That could be Link to the Past. And then in Four Sword Adventures, you have the maidens praying to keep the darkness at bay. Yeah, praying in the Zelda series is a pretty common trope. Like even in Breath of the Wild, Zelda's supposed to pray at all the major sites like the Fountain of Courage, Fountain of Power, Fountain of Wisdom, and then she prays and prays and prays. Like prayer in and of itself, very common religious thing. The Zelda series definitely has that in spades. And in Spirit Tracks, one of the Gorons informs you that Kagoron, I think, is praying at the altar of the mountain goddess for a stop to the volcano outburst. Skyward Sword has another depiction as far as like people praying. Like they just, in the Zelda series, they just pray left and right. And a super interesting one that you could go over is in the pre-built version for Ocarina of Time, they originally had Islamic chants in the background for the volcano temple or the fire temple. And they ended up taking that out, which they're just stock chants, so they didn't mean any harm or anything by it. But because of potential religious backlash, they just took it out. They just changed it entirely. But the 1.2 build of the game of Ocarina of Time features like a stock Islamic chant as far as like the fire temple background music, which, you know, on a side note too, it also appears in Cruising World, or I think it's Cruising World or Caro Cruising of Cruising World. There's some other places that it, or at least some other games. It's just from it's a stock audio library. It's their old audio jungle. I think it's also in Parasite Eve too. There's some religious things there, but the fact that they removed it really helps signify that Nintendo, while taking heavy inspiration from Christianity and European folklore, that they really wanted to move away from the whole religious thing, which makes sense because you want your pride. It's still a business. They still want to appeal to the most amount of people, and that also often includes not offending anyone for whatever reason, because people get offended pretty easily. And not to say that it's all not justified. Some of it's justified, like, bro, really? But in general, like everything in life, like I mentioned before, you have to have balance. And if we look at notable demons in the Zelda series, just in general, there may be some representation as far as like angelology and Abrahamic religions. For instance, you have Girahim and Agahim. Girahim from Skyward Sword and Agahim from, I believe, Link to the Past. And there may be, or at least I like to believe, with the M's at the ends of both of those, that they're a reference to Hebrew suffixes. Like I said, include especially M, which in Hebrew biblical text is a lexicon and angel hierarchy. You've got your cherubim, seraphim, ophanim, and so on and so forth, and all that other good stuff. Girahim, going back to him, Girahim's sick, by the way. If you haven't played Skyward Sword, you should play Skyward Sword. It's really good, especially play it before Tears of the Kingdom, which I don't know if you'll have time to beat it by the time this video goes up. But anyways, Girahim is referred to as a demon lord or demon tribe chief, as far as the original Japanese text for it. And Agahim is authority over the demons in the Dark World, like in Link to the Past. Yeah, it was Link to the Past. And Agahim even makes a remark about his position among the demons in the game. So I think you got another connection with Vati. Vati, I believe, is in the Minish Cap. And there is a interpretation that you can make there with it being a seraph angel, and was said to look like that in biblical text. Like there's a burning figure with 6 wings, each with eyes. Boy, the Bible definitely loves eyes, especially too many eyes. But Vati's wrath has 6 wings, and it's the composition of his body has a fiery look to it. When you get to Vati, which who knows, Vati may make an appearance. But anyways, there's an animation online that really showcases what Seraph is throughout to look like, and Ganon was titled the Prince of Darkness, and basically that just means the devil. And there's an eternal fight between the Demon King's reincarnation and the Lesser Goddess reincarnation, which became the central plot of the series following Skyward Sword. And then, of course, you got the Master Sword that's reoccurring over and over and over. And you could take that to be the Zelda series version of the legendary sword, the Excalibur, with the legend of King Arthur, King Arthur's court, and all that other good stuff. The shield, I mean, I've already mentioned that since we're mentioning the sword, but like I said, the shield explicitly has a cross on it, especially in Zelda 1, Zelda 2. There's strong references to Christianity. And on a side note, even though I would say this is coincidental, because the Hero is Defeated timeline has the majority of its games in the early parts of the just Zelda existing as a franchise. But it's very interesting to note, regardless, that most of the Christian references, as far as like the Zelda series, seems to be from when the hero is defeated, like throughout that. And then you have the era of decline, but also like Link to the Past to a degree, which belongs in the era of light and dark. So faith is very possible that faith could be less attractive to the people of Hyrule as Hyrule declines, because as much as they pray, they're not getting anything out of it, with no silver lining in sight. So people, you could make the in-universe proclamation that, well, I keep praying and I keep getting fucked. So why would I keep praying? And so it's just like super fascinating to me to go into that. People are just losing faith in that. It's super fascinating. I mentioned earlier with the whole Triforce and the Holy Trinity. With the Zelda universe resembling like medieval Europe, you would naturally think that they'd model the dominant religion at the time. Like, I can't help but think that there's referencing the Holy Trinity when I see the Triforce, which could be the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, granted, the Triforce has 3 parts. Each triangle represents one of the 3 creators, like the golden goddesses, who themselves are probably more based off of the 3 creator gods. And I believe this is in Shinto religion, which would be Heavenly Kami from Shinto and the Christian god. The fact that they leave Hyrule and depart to the heavens after they create it is really somewhat similar to what the Heavenly Kami does. But at the same time, the Holy Trinity, like, God is supposed to represent the all-powerful, and then Jesus is supposed to, or at least in my eyes, is supposed to represent courage through faith, and the Holy Ghost, I believe, grants wisdom through its presence. You've got the Triforce, you've got God at the top, you've got the Triforce of courage, which would be Jesus through faith, and you have the Holy Ghost through wisdom, which you often more not see. Zelda seems to be intertwined with a Holy Ghost at some, I mean, hell, even in Spirit Tracks, like literally a ghost, and she's holy, so it doesn't get more blatant than that. But let's go over each of these because I find them super fascinating. So when we look at the Triforce of power and we equate it to God, for power, or at least in the physical sense, that was given to an individual called Samson from the Old Testament. And the Old Testament is a very mean book, which I think that's why they came up with the New Testament, because the Old Testament is kind of, yeesh, it's not fun there. I mean, it's not as much fun in the New Testament, but it's definitely a lot nicer than the old one. But anyways, like several times through the accounts of Samson, the Bible makes it clear that it is the Spirit of the Lord that allows him to accomplish the feats such as like tearing a lion in half with his bare hands, or defeating 30 men single-handedly, or like the power was also given to figures in the Bible such as King Saul as well. I was about to say but yeah, King Saul, in the form of like authority of rule. But power is easily the most corruptible and tempting of the spiritual gifts. Like Salmon lost his power when he turned away from God. When he did regain his power, it was only through like repentance, and the final feat of his like physical strength ultimately led to his own demise. On the other hand, Saul grew corrupt because of his power. You know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. While he started as an annotated ruler over God's nation, he became a bloodthirsty jackass. Similarly, like Ganondorf, I mean, you can already kind of draw the comparisons between the two, or between the characters. You can between Samson and the king, or King Saul. He became a bloodthirsty tyrant as well. And Ganon in the later games is the bearer of the Triforce of Power. He comes into the position of influence and authority already and has dark intentions. And thus, he uses his power for evil purposes. Time and time again, his power allows him to wreak havoc over the land, but he ultimately gets crushed by his own power. Like, it leads to his own downfall. And my take on that too is, yeah, his methods are really bad. He's not a good person at all. But if you know about the events of Skyward Sword, it's really fucked, because he's doomed from the get-go. The way that I see things is everyone has a potential for really objectively good and objectively bad. But considering the circumstances of Ganondorf's birth and Ganondorf's reincarnation and so on and so forth, he's basically just like set up. It's when you objectively think about it, because you would basically be just doing this to a random individual. With these circumstances, he's set up to just he's a tragic figure. Ganondorf is a character that's continuously born to the Gerudo tribe. It's a race of people that have been shunned and treated like crap by the rest of Hyrule. Now, this rejection and isolation has shaped the character and the community that he's a part of. If you're not familiar with the Gerudo tribe, they only have a male every 100 years. But other than that, it's nothing but females. But this constant rejection and isolation has really shaped the character and the tribe in and of itself. It drives Ganondorf, aside from, the thing that's within him, or at least that's reincarnated with him, it drives him to seek power and to seek acceptance and to carve a place out for himself and his people.
Whether you see him in Ocarina of Time, whether you see him in Twilight Princess, whether you see him in Wind Waker, his motivations are objectively all rooted in tragedy.
Ganondorf is really no slouch when it comes to combat. Like, he will throw hands all day long. He's a pretty skilled warrior with immense strength and magical abilities. Even if you take the Triforce of Power out of the equation, he's really not something to sneeze at. Your man can hold his own. Throughout the various games he's appeared in, he's challenged Link and Zelda over and over and over, and each time he's come really close to achieving his goals. And that's, bad or not, that's to be respected. Because don't get me wrong, I'm very familiar with what's in him that makes him want to do it over and over, or at least insert negative consequences over and over and over. But if it was me, would I hate Zelda and Link? Sure, it would just be inherent in me to do so. But I'm not putting up with this. I'm not. I refuse. Like, I don't know how big Hyrule is as far as, is it a globe? Or is it just like a plot of land somewhere on a planet? Or is it is it flat Earth? Who knows? It's never been made quite clear exactly what Hyrule is, but I'm not putting up with that. Will I hate them? Yeah, but I'd have to just leave Hyrule because I refuse. But at the same time, I guess another reason that he's a formidable opponent is you have to be tough, considering the conditions that your people tend to have to be in. Especially if you really get into Wind Waker, because this is the most pronounced version of him, or at least to showcase he's a tragic figure, or even before that, even if you go back to Ocarina of Time
and you go to Kakariko Village and you go to the graveyard in that village, you'll eventually come across a tombstone that says, "Here is gathered Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred."
And the Gerudo were part of that. That's a reason that they've been relegated to the desert. And you can imagine, who do you know is enjoying life in the desert? Who's smiling all the time in the desert? More often than not, it sucks ass in the desert. So you know you're not having a good time out there. It's extremely cold, which Ganondorf and Wind Waker went over, and it's extremely hot. Like, it's just two extremes that you have to deal with back and forth. Like, I imagine your economy is not going to be doing too well out in the desert. So they've had to put up with a lot. So when you have to put up with a lot, you really have no choice but to be tough. I mean, considering there's conditions out there, they had to become thieves to survive.
Really, it's what happens in life in general. More often than not, a lot of people find themselves in really bad financial situations, or their environment's really shitty, and they end up having bad outcomes. That's just a way of life, unfortunately. Think about it. You being in the desert versus everybody else being in like lush forestry full of water and prosperity, and you're just in a crusty desert. Does that seem fair to you? You think you're going to be happy about that? Absolutely not.
Think about this. As bad of a rap that the Sheikah, or at least some sections of the Sheikah, and the Gerudo have gotten as far as Hyrule, really, can you blame them? Can you blame Ganondorf for the reason he views Hyrule the way that he does? Like, it's not a good history at all. Whether it be just the Hyrulean Civil War, or whether it be in Twilight Princess with the Arbiter's Grounds. Like, imagine you're about to be executed, and you still have the screams and hollerings of your people in the background, like they're being tortured in the background. This is basically what the Arbiter's Grounds is in Twilight Princess. It's a torture location. You have that playing over and over and over, and you tell me how you feel about that. Some of these people, you are related to, like, biologically you're related to them, and even if you weren't, you grew up with these people. They fed you, they clothed you, they took care of you, they talked to you, they befriended you, they've bonded with you. And you hear their agonies and screams as you're about to be executed. It's gnarly. Please tell me if you can come out the same and be like, this is fine. A miserable life, and to cause misery, and to be hated objectively endlessly, and for like what? That's the wild part. Like, it's literally for nothing, more or less. It's really just for fucking nothing. But everybody has the conditions, or at least the potential, for being objectively good and objectively bad. But if the conditions are right for it, you can end up really bad. Even the Joker, if you don't know anything about DC Comics, or everybody should more or less know Batman's Joker. So even the Joker has mentioned it, whether it be through the old Dark Knight movie from like 2008, I believe, or which movie was that? The Killing Joke, I think. Like, all it takes is one bad day, and one bad day can send you down. And it happens to like real people. One bad day can send you down a really bad trajectory, and it can alter your life and make you heinous, like we have to experience through society itself. It's pretty wild. Like, there was an experiment, I think, done before. I can't remember the name of it. Was it the Stanford experiment? Maybe. But it basically showcases that anybody can become like a Nazi. Like, anybody can become objectively evil. They just have to have the right conditions for it. And when that research came to be, you come to find out that those people were, they didn't think they were doing anything wrong per se. I mean, some of them probably eventually like, hey, this is clearly wrong, but you just conditioned slowly and thoroughly, and you think to yourself, it's like, well, I'm not the bad guy, they're the bad guys. Like, we're doing the right thing, quote unquote. And that's how a lot of issues come about. And I feel like Ganondorf, more or less, aside from what's in him, it's the same thing. The Hyrule family, it's not talked about much in the Zelda series, and it's fertile territory. Like, my God, you can make a banger of a game if Aonuma and like Nintendo itself tried to dissect the Hyrule family, and you could get some good ass content from it. So, or at least it's vaguely mentioned or vaguely alluded to that the Hyrule family is not this holy family that they're made out to, just like in standard games. They basically were massive jackasses to the Gerudo and to a lesser degree, like the Gorons and the Zorans, they basically they don't really do anything. Like if you look at Ocarina of Time or whatever, and just to set up how everybody answers to the Hyrulean royal family, it's like this hierarchy. It's like, for what? Like, you don't do, like, somebody for the love of God tell me, what does the Hyrulean family do for the Zoras? What do they do for the Gorons? What do they do for the Rito? What do they do for the Gerudo? They make sure that the Gerudo are in like a hot ass desert. They definitely do that. But other than other than that travesty, like, what do? They just collect taxes. Like, that's it. Some bullshit feudalism. That's really what it is. Yeah, it's fertile territory if they actually ever decide to, like, let's dissect. Let's redefine things again. Let's dissect our long-standing royal family and flesh it out. That would be a sick game, a sick concept for a game. But I don't know if Nintendo has the cojones for it. I guess we'll see at some point. But anyways, so for the Triforce of Power, power corrupts absolutely, and that's why it's a good representation for Ganondorf, and I believe that's a good representation with God and the Triforce of Power. So we move on to the Holy Spirit. So for the Holy Spirit, that's going to be the Triforce of Wisdom. The wisdom is a gift that God has granted to many, and of its virtues, the request for God's wisdom was highly praised by the Almighty himself. I think Solomon was a legendary figure and was regarded as an icon of wisdom and intellect. And God himself allegedly spoke to Solomon and asking what did he desire more than anything else. And after some thought, Solomon asked that he be given wisdom. Knowledge is power. God said unto Solomon, since this is your heart's desire, and you have not asked for wealth, possessions, or honor, or for anything, or nor for death for even your enemies, and since you have not asked for like a long life, but for wisdom and knowledge to govern the people over whom I have made you king, therefore wisdom and knowledge will be given to you, and I will also give you wealth, possessions, and honor such as no king who has ever had it before you and never will. So it's pretty wild. So since he chose wisdom instead of like anything that could be perceived as selfish, he got everything. He basically chose the right door, and all the doors flew open. I think that was Chronicles like 111-12, like 111 to 112, I think. And I think Joseph was given the wisdom and insight to interpret dreams, like jump into another story. And as a result, he found favor with the nobility of Egypt. And then the Magi, blessed with the wisdom to read the heavens and recognize the signs. Their insights eventually like led them to meeting the King of Kings himself. Like those gifted with the wisdom are directly tagged to guidance. I think that's like in Genesis. But as far as like the wisdom of Triforce, to tie that back into it, the wisdom is the Triforce that's passed down the line of Hyrule's princesses and the descendants of Hylia ourselves. Like Zelda's role is like half wisdom and half faith. And the majority of the games in which she plays a larger part in it for it, like example, the Ocarina of Time, Zelda's, like Joseph, is given a prophetic dream. Like she's able to interpret it correctly, both in the omen of darkness and as an omen of hope. Like she has the wisdom to foresee things like potential hardships that will befall the kingdom before it even has to face it. And that's how, for instance, with Ocarina of Time, she knows what Ganondorf is up to, and she can work with Link to circumvent it. Like she knows, however, like Link would still need like a guiding hand to assist him and direct him on his quest, which, because she has wisdom throughout that, after she meets Link for the first time, throughout the game in and of itself, she's going to be conveying wisdom to him time and time again under the guise of Sheik. So Zelda is aware of that Link will have need of her insight and guidance, especially just throughout the game, and essentially because he's essentially like a 7-year-old kid at the time. However, like Zelda is equally aware of the danger to her person and of the world itself, and is discovered. And if she is discovered, which eventually she is, but like years later, she'd be captured by Ganon. But the fact that Zelda, even as a child, was aware of the gravity of the events around her shows that she is extremely mature, and that's why she holds the Triforce of wisdom. Like she's well wise beyond her years. And as far as Jesus representing the Triforce of courage, like courage in the Bible is a gift given to those who were the most unlikely to accomplish anything great for themselves, which I find super fascinating because, Link is supposed to be a representative like the every person player. And we may not have royalty under our belt, we may not have power under our belt, but we can at least have courage. And I find that super fascinating because, for example, since we're using biblical references here, Moses was a pussy, especially when it came to speaking. Like he ran away from Egypt when he was found guilty of murder and pleaded with God, like, please choose someone else to confront the Pharaoh. Like, not me, I don't want to do it. However, despite him being scared, like a lot of people are, like we all are, even I get scared, he eventually found the courage, through his faith, to return to his homeland and face the past. Likewise, like David was just a child, just like Link in a lot of the games. He was never lacking courage or skill, but few had any belief in his abilities to do anything with it. And that's not too different from Link for Ocarina of Time. Like, it's the boy without the fairy. He's the lazy, like, do nothing trainee. Like, even when you find him, he's sleeping. And no one expects much out of him, or more often than not. Like, he's also, I believe, in Ocarina of Time, he's bullied, like, just a little bit, or at least by the one guy, or at least the one Kokiri that's blocking you from leaving the forest until you accomplish a set of, I think until you get like a sword and or a shield. Yeah, I think it's until you get like a sword and a shield, then he lets you go. And that will be after going to the Deku Tree, or the Great Deku Tree. So, in more or less in every Legend of Zelda game, like, Link has to discover courage for himself, for he's found to be worthy of bearing the Triforce of Courage, and in more or less every game that the Triforce is involved with. Like, Link is forced to act on the behalf of another in order to find his hidden potential. Like, he simply thinks more of the safety of others and those around him, and then puts his own self in danger. And that is the Triforce of Courage regarding, like, Jesus. Like, courage through faith, I think, is the moral of it. I think you have to have faith that it's kind of like with the Green Lantern, which is super interesting because they're both green. Like, the Triforce of Courage has a semblance of color with the green, and then Link's tunic is green, and then you've got the Green Lantern that is like willpower, and that is green. And the only way that you can have willpower more often than not is you have to have faith that everything will turn out the way that you want based off of your will. And if you don't have that faith, then it's hard to have that will. And I think that's why the Green Lantern rings are weak. And I'm taking a side, I know, but that's why the Green Lantern rings are weak against yellow, because yellow is fear. And if you have fear, then it's hard to have faith and courage, because you're supposed to get rid of fear through faith. And when you get rid of fear, the only thing that's left really is courage and will. Just an interesting aside there. And while we're speaking on threes, I really think that the number 3, along with Zelda and the Bible, they share some interesting similarities between the two. So the number 3 in the Bible conveys like a meaning of completeness, which is why the Triforce and the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I think to a lesser degree, the number 7 also has a big meaning in the Bible, and it appears about 467 times, I believe. The number 3. The number 3s are righteous patriarchs before the flood were Abel, Enoch, and Noah, for example. After the deluge, like, there was the 3 righteous fathers, quote unquote, and that would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, later renamed Israel. And then there's like 27 books in the New Testament, which is 3 cubed, and that's for completeness to the third power. Jesus prayed 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane before his arrest, and he was placed on the cross at the 3rd hour of the day. I think it's like 9 a.m. and died at the 9th hour. Like, there were 3 hours of darkness that covered the land, while Jesus was suffered on the cross for the 6th hour to the 9th hour. And this is the number of resurrection. Like, and then Christ was dead for 3 full days and nights at a total of like 72 hours before being resurrected on Saturday, April 8th, just before the sunset. In Zelda, of all the numbers significantly represented in the series, number 3 seems to be arguably one of the most canonically important. Like 3 is the first number that represents like the geometric shape as far as a Triforce. One of these roles, arguably the most noteworthy in the series, is balance. From a religious perspective, like the main source of divine power in the world of the Zelda series, again, is the Triforce. And according to legend, like the last legacy of the Golden Goddesses, they left to the land of mortals. Ocarina of Time, you have the gods Din, Lanayru, and Faeror, just in case I didn't say them earlier. You have 3 spiritual stones in Ocarina of Time. You have to open the room to the Master Sword, which would be the Zelda series Excalibur. You have Jabu Jabu, the guardian deity of the Zora. You have the Great Deku Tree, and you have Death Mountain. Then, of course, you've got Link to the Past. You have the Pendants of Virtue in Link to the Past. In Wind Waker, you have the Goddess Pearls. In Twilight Princess, you have the Fused Shadow. You have to collect 3 of those, put them together. In Skyward Sword, you have 3 dragon spirits that watch over their respective providences. You've got Lanayru, you've got Eldin, and then you got Pharaon, the Water Dragon. And then you've got just the general colors of blue, green, and red. Like for green, for example, it's like I mentioned before, it's courage. It's associated with green, which is associated with the forest, which is associated with courage because it's large. It's a wildly ecosystem full of life and danger, and inviting environment that also encourages us to develop our skills and face future challenges with boldness and determination. Like the forest can be dangerous, but it also can be very peaceful. It can also be harmonic. It can also reflect innocence, like in Incubator. It's the incubator of nature. And as Ocarina of Time showcases, it's basically that for the Kokiri. And then you've got the color red, which fire is power. Fire has powered society for like thousands of years. Power can corrupt absolutely, and danger can befall those who do not respect the dangers of uncontrolled power. You can get a lesson of that from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Power is often seen as fire, and fire is also seen as deadly, but if you work harmoniously with it, you can control it just fine because fire is life. Play with fire and you may get burned. Like those who use power for power's sake and not embracing the life aspect of it. Fire from the sun, which gives the forest life, but it can burn it down if uncontrolled. That one covers that. That covers the red colors. Blue should represent wisdom. That's why you see blue so much in Breath of the Wild. Wisdom in the Sheikah. Wisdom can control power. It can control fire. Wisdom, sharing the color of water, can put out the fire. That is power. Brains over bronze, basically. Like water, that is wisdom, can give life to the forest, and courage and wisdom can bring about courage by not needing to fear the unknown, as it is not known through wisdom, or is now known through wisdom, I mean. Like fear of the unknown creates that fear. The less you know, the more you fear. The more you know, the less you fear. It's kind of like, it's that whole, those who fail to plan to fail. Don't be scared of anything. Just be alert, be ready. Just in general, the more knowledge you have of the situation, the more you can take control of it. And that's why wisdom is such a powerful tool. And wisdom on its own, keep it in mind, cannot create balance. Treat wisdom harmoniously, not as of its own, but a complementary to courage on its own and with power. So they all 3 of them balance out each other. Courage, wisdom, and power. 3 is an important number for the series because it represents a balance between contrasting elements and virtues, and it symbolizes like the end of a cycle and the start of another, as well as the preparation to face whatever comes. With courage from the forest and power from fire and wisdom from water, it is possible to bring peace to the world, and I find that like a super fascinating thing to summarize between the 2. So I really do think that the number 3 is massively important to the Zelda series and, into the Bible in and of itself. And I imagine there's pretty more examples of the number 3 in the Bible, but we're already running super long as it is. So shout outs if anybody has made it this far. I really do hope that you're enjoying like me trying to tie this into the Tears of the Kingdom, because I find like the parallels are super fascinating to me. But anyways, The number seven. The number seven appears a pretty decent amount in the Bible. I don't think as much as the number three, but it definitely appears. Like the number seven is a powerful symbol in the Bible, especially in the book of Genesis. Like it is mentioned at least 7 times that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Like this is seen as like a symbolic rest, a completion and perfection. Like the number seven is also seen as a symbol of completeness in the Bible, as it appears in many stories, such as like the 7 days of creation, the 7 churches, the 7 seals, and it also seen as a symbol of spiritual perfection, as like the seventh day of rest, like I mentioned. And I think it's used like 730 something times, maybe 700, I think 35 times. And even in the book of Revelation alone, which we'll get to in a bit, it's used like 54 times in the book of Revelation. Like it symbolizes completeness and perfection, both physical and spiritual. The number seven has like a significant role, at least according to John in the Bible. Like you have the story of the fall of Jericho and the book of Joshua. You've got the book of Leviticus, which describes like the Feast of Weeks, which is celebrated 7 weeks over Passover. The book of Daniel refers to a prophecy of 70 weeks, which is interpreted as 70 weeks of years, or 490 years. Like you've got the book of Proverbs, and then you got the story of Cain and Abel. And in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain is promised sevenfold vengeance if anyone tries to kill him. And then you got the number seven and God's feast days. There are like 7 annual holy days, beginning with the Passover and the ending of the last great day. And the cycle of the holy days is completed with 3 festival seasons by the 7th month of the sacred calendar. Passover and unleavened bread, I think it's like the 1st month, the Pentecost, the 3rd month, and the trumpets atonement. The Bible is really a fan of the number 7. Ocarina of Time, you have 7 temples, and then just like that, you have 7 churches with the Bible. And of course, you got like your 7 deadly sins. I have not watched that anime yet. I have to watch it at some point. But anyways, you've got Doomsday. You got 7 golden lampstands. You got 7 churches, 7 seals. For Zelda, you got, I think, about 7 races, is it not? You got the Rito, you got the Zora, you got the Gorons, you got the Hylians, you've got the Gerudo, you've got the Zonai, you've got the Kokiri. Well, and then you have the Sheikah, so that could be the 8th. That could be the Zonai could be the special 8th one. And I'm not sure, but you may have the Minish, and that may make it. And I don't want to miss any potential race, because I feel like the Minish could very well come back, because the Minish were slated to be in Breath of the Wild, but I think they got cut out. So anyways, before I get stunlocked on that too long, and at the bottom of the box, for the Tears of the Kingdom collection, like there's 7 people, and in Skyward Sword there is also 7 sages. And throughout the Zelda series and the Bible, like the number 7 is used quite a bit, like I mentioned. So 7 is seen as a positive number because it is the sum between 5 and 2, which was seen as like lucky by the Pythagoreans. And it was associated with these 7 holy temples, I think in Abram culture, and it's like a balance of hydrogen potential between bases and acids. So it also has a significance in science as well, as there is like a 7 SI base units and the 7 basic colors that compose white light. As far as Zelda, the Twilight Princess, there are 7 hidden skills to learn, and the 7th of them is like the Great Spin. That's like Link's iconic spin attack. And in Majora's Mask, you have I think there's like, isn't there 7 Zora eggs, I think? And retrieving them all teaches Link a new song, but this song is particularly helps Lulu, and that's the mother of those eggs. And I think that's to recover her lost voice. This is from Majora's Mask. In Ocarina of Time, like I mentioned, there's 7 temples. You have the forest, fire, water, light, shadow, time. You have all those temples. And then you have the 7 Years War, which that's another thing that I really wish that they would cover at some point. An event that's referenced in several games that took place before the events of Ocarina of Time and had significant impact on the game's world's history. It really should be covered, but they just haven't done it yet, and it just blows my mind. But then, of course, you have 7 sages. And the sages are a group of characters in some of the games who are responsible for maintaining the balance of the world. and they're crucial to the game's story. You have Zelda, which is often the leader. You've got Rauru, which I think is like in second command. You've got Sarah, which is like your childhood friend in Ocarina of Time. You got Darunia. You got, and I think he ends up being like your sworn brother. You've got Princess Ruto, who also wants to marry you. You've got Impa, which I wish they would do more stuff with Impa. And then you got Nabooru, which, it's also known as Planet X, but Nabooru, which is the Gerudo chick from Ocarina of Time, who she's like, yo, I wish I knew how you would turn out when you grew up, because I should have hollered at you, which I don't know how I feel about that. I'm into it. She looks good to me, but that was always a weird statement to me. It's like, girl, that's a kid. But then again, when she said that to him, he was an adult, so tomato, I guess he can pass. She's hollering at him when he's legal. It's just weird because you go back in time. But anyways, Stunlock over. In Majora's Mask, there are like 7 main areas within the game's world, each with its own like unique features and stuff like that. In Link to the Past, you even have 7 maidens and another group of characters in some of the games who are linked to the 7 sages have their own roles in the story. And in Link to the Past, there is a mention of like 7 wise men, which I think is probably like a mistranslation to the 7 sages. So I'm referencing them because I don't want to potentially leave out anything. Like they're mentioned in the backstory of Link to the Past. Then you've got Wind Waker, which has this pretty sick stained glass design that also depicts like the 6 sages minus Zelda. Zelda would be the 7th sage. Another neat thing that you can find with Wind Waker is there's 7 rows and 7 columns of islands for a total of like 49, which it's divisible by 7, of which provide like a meaningful legacy from like the Forgotten Hyrule Kingdom, because the Forgotten Hyrule Kingdom is under the waves now. We know it's Arctic, so it's underneath. But when you connect like certain islands together, like the position of all these 7 islands is such that like if you look at it from like a top-down view, they show the form of a Triforce, and the Tower of Gods turns out to be at the center among all the other 6 islands, like right smack dab in the middle. So that's super fascinating to me when you think about it. It's a very clever, like nice additional touch. Like, and there's 7 dungeons in the game. There's 7 lunar phases, and like there's also 7 islands visited by the ghost ship. Yeah, there's a ghost ship in Wind Waker, if you didn't know this. It's pretty cool. There's 7 figurine rooms in the Nintendo Gallery, 7 Great Fairy Mountains, and 7 Star Islands, and is the only archipelago that's not haunted by the ghost ship, which is pretty weird. It's a pretty interesting touch to add to it. In Breath of the Wild, you have 7 heroines. You do have the hidden 8th heroine, and that's its own like unique side quest, which could be the Gerudo honoring the 7 sages of Ocarina of Time, but I'm not entirely sure. They just leave it vague to where you kind of do it up to your own interpretation, but are known by the Gerudo people as the divine protectors of the Gerudo people. Like the statues can be found like east of the Gerudo ruins. It's not really too far, especially if you got like a horse or something. It's not super far. Can you take on? No, not horse. The seal, the orb, like that thing. You get in one of those is really not super far. But anyways, each unique power and skill, like you got skill, spirit, endurance, knowledge, flight, motion, and gentleness. Like this of course doesn't account for like I said, the weird missing 8th heroine that's well away. It's all the way in like the highlands, the Gerudo highlands. It's possible that the 8th one could have time manipulation, which would be super interesting. Like the 8th heroine is likely Hylia. It could be Hylia. The inscription on the heron statues are like the 7 sages are translated. Different cultures interpret folklore and deities and heroes of the past in different ways. So it could very well be possible that the translation could be slightly different than its true meaning, or at least its intended initial meaning. Then you have the trial of the sword as 7 monks, and the poses likely. What I found super interesting is if you get the DLC for the Trial of the Sword, the poses that the monks are in is likely a reference to the 7 sages because they match those poses. It's super fascinating. Like it's such an interesting intertwined connection between Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild. When you restore the Master of the Sword back to its true potential, if you do that, If you do that quest, then you'll see exactly what I mean. Unfortunately, you have to pay up for it, but that sucks. Anyways, just to really bookend it, like the Zelda series and the Bible and the number 7, between the two, it's used like a lot. It's used like everywhere. I mean, I'm sure it's common in other games too, for sure. But given that Christianity parallels in so many ways, it's really tough to ignore it. It's a very important number in the Zelda series and Zelda lore and in the Bible. And it's just a neat thing to note as far as like the potential connection. So we'll be moving on to the Book of Genesis and Skyward Sword. So the Book of Genesis explains in Ocarina of Time, the golden goddesses descended down to earth. It's not clear if the golden goddesses were created by Hylia or was Hylia created by them. It's not entirely sure. I'm under the impression that they created Hylia, but I could be wrong because it's so vague. Anyways, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild have more in common with the Book of Genesis of the Zelda universe than the rest of the games, I would say. It's very true that Zelda's role in the plot of Skyward Sword squares well with Jesus' role. She's very Jesus-like, and she's descended from the heavens down to the earth below. Second is that she, like Jesus, is an incarnation of a deity, where Jesus is that of God and Zelda is that of Hylia. And then of course you got another to where Zelda chooses to remain here, this time deep in a sleep for 1,000 years, which could be put with the parallel with like the second coming of Jesus. And fourth, I mean, the conflict between Zelda and Demise is, at least on a superficial level, somewhat similar to just, the battle between heaven and hell, Jesus and Satan, and that kind of thing. Like, she's purification and cleansing rituals, or she uses those rituals at the temples, which could be viewed as some parallel of like the Christian tradition of baptism. And she's designed as like the spiritual maiden. Hylia really could be Jesus in this regard, along with the three gods. Like, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And so he created man and woman in his own image. As God also said, let the earth bring forth living creatures. And so he created all the living creatures of the world. There's probably a god or gods above Hylia. They made like Hylians in their image, and as well as like the Skyloftians. Like, the parallels are just like, there's too many. As I dig deeper, like the parallels are, it's wild to me. Like I was like, this is gonna be like a little bit of a connection. It's like, well, damn. I look a bit further. Well, damn. I look a bit further. Well, damn. Like on the lore side, like according to like Hyrule Historia, like the very first event in Hyrulean history, allegedly, is the creation of heaven and earth. Like right off the bat, the beginning of Hyrule's history is like a direct reflection of the story of Genesis. Like it's so weird. Like the very first game in the timeline, allegedly, the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword opens up with a legend in which the earth was filled with corruption and violence. That sounds familiar to like another story, another biblical story. This is a tale that you humans have passed down through the generations. It tells a war of unmatched scale and ferocity, the likes of which one would never be seen again. Sounds familiar. One dark fateful day, the earth cracked wide and maleficent forces rushed forth from the fissure. They mounted a brutal assault upon the surface. It sounds familiar. Driving the land into deep despair. Like they burnt forests to ash, choked the land's sweet springs, and murdered without hesitation. It sounds familiar. Leave no survivors. They did all this in their lust to take the ultimate power protected by her grace, the goddess. Sounds familiar. The power she guarded was without equal, handed down by the gods of old. Like this power gave its holder the means to make any desire a reality. Such was the might of the ultimate power that the old ones placed it in care of the goddess. And that's the opening scene from Skyward Sword. That's sounding a lot like the Tears of the Kingdom trailer that you've seen before. If you haven't, you should check it out. But it looks very apocalyptic-y, to say the least. So it has such stark parallels. It's kind of hard to ignore. And then on the business side, remember Nintendo released Skyward Sword for the Switch. why would Nintendo release Skyward Sword before Tears of the Kingdom? Tears of the Kingdom was likely supposed to come out in 2022 but it couldn't due to delays, likely due to the pandemic. There's something there between the two, and I think Aonuma has mentioned that before. So the Minish Cap people, like I've mentioned, were supposed to be in Breath of the Wild, but they were cut. They were just after Skyward Sword. Then there's monsters, and the monsters of the first game and the latest game, the real world canonical first game and the most recent as of 2023's main timeline. You have the Lionels, and they're in Breath of the Wild and in just the original Zelda. And only mostly to my knowledge shows up in the Downfall timeline. It's the same as the Gleeok returning. That's clearly a Gleeok that's on the bridge in the reveal trailer, and it's marked his first appearance since forever. And I think that's a huge harbinger of bad news. It's very Book of Revelations-y. Like in the Book of Revelations, the first demon to return is a dragon, which is identified as the ancient serpent, and Gleeok is one of the most ancient in terms of Zelda enemies in this series, and it's in the very first game ever released, and it's returning. It's the first boss slash sub boss to appear in the trailer after the Bokoblins are mining. So, and Redeads damn sure aren't a good thing either. Those little shits terrified the hell out of me as a kid. Like, they aren't in the very first game, but they debut in the very first game where the timeline is supposed to split, which is Ocarina of Time. And that's quite the end of days creature, if I do say so myself. Man, it freaks me right the fuck out. So I would say that there is potential connections of Skyward Sword era, or at least that era happening after Breath of the Wild and the Tears of the Kingdom era, which is signified by the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros, just to recap, represents a cycle of death and rebirth. The Ouroboros, or Tail Devourer, is like an ancient symbol of the serpent or dragon eating its own tail. And it is thought throughout representation the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth, and is often used as a metaphor for eternity and the concept of something constantly recreating itself. There's even an underworld aspect I would like to cover. Like, you have Dante's Inferno, and then there's like 8 levels. The story of Dante's Inferno comes from like an epic poem, like the Divine Comedy, which was written by an Italian poet called Dante Alighieri, and that was in like the 14th century. The poem is divided into like 3 parts. Of course, we revisit 3s: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Which, if Paradiso sounds familiar to you, then you've probably played the Bayonetta series. The Inferno tells the story of Dante's journey through hell, guided by like the Roman poet Virgil. Dante encounters like various sinners as he descends through the 9 circles of hell, each circle reserved for a particular type of jackass. And in the 9th circle, Dante encounters Satan himself and is frozen in like a lake of ice. It's a pretty wild romp. Like, Dante's journey through hell is like an allegory for the spiritual journey of the soul as he confronts his own sins and strives for salvation. Like, the poem is also a commentary on the political and religious issues of Dante's time, and it also has a profound influence on Western literature and culture. Like, the story of Dante's Inferno also heavily draws from like medieval Christianity theology and Dante's own political and personal beliefs. Like, the poem reflects Dante's views on sin, justice, and the afterlife, and it was intended to serve as a warning to his contemporaries about the consequences of, being a prick. In the original Zelda game, this is the reason that I bring it up. In the original Zelda game, Dante's Inferno seems to have like some crossover with that. You have Zelda dungeons for like the very first Zelda game. You have the different levels of the dungeon. You have the eagle, the moon, manji, which is swastika. I'm gonna steer clear of that a little bit, and the snake, the lizard, and the dragon, and the demon, and lion. They do not have like direct representations in the Bible, but there is some references to these animals and symbols in the Bible that may be of interest to these. And when you go through the Zelda dungeon, it's kind of akin to like going through these different levels of hell. Now, granted, they may not seem that much because it was on the regular Nintendo, so you only have so much to work with. But if you use your imagination, I would say that those would be like the level of hell, or the different levels of hell for Link to have to confront for the issues of his time. As far as like the different animals, You have the eagle. The eagle is mentioned several times in the Bible as a symbol of strength and power. You have the moon. The moon is mentioned numerous times in the Bible, particularly in the context of festivals and calendars. You have the snake. The snake is famously depicted as like the jackass from the Garden of Eden. Then you got the dragon. While the dragon is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, like there are references to a great dragon or a serpent in the book of Revelation, and that figure is often related to like the devil or Satan. Then of course you got demon. The concept of demons is pretty self-explanatory. You have lion. The lion is like another animal that's often associated with strength and power in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. Death Mountain. Death Mountain is located in like the Legend of Zelda series, but it does not have like much of a direct representation in the Bible. But you could draw some comparisons with it. You have the lizard. The lizard is not really mentioned in there, but I feel like there with creeping things are mentioned, or reptiles is mentioned in the Old Testament. It's a pretty rough book, so I'm going off of extreme memory for it. And then Manji. Manji was the swastika before the Psycho in World War II made it poison to never use again. But that was like another aspect of the Zelda dungeon and the connections between them, like the idea of sin and punishment for the Zelda dungeon. In Dante's Inferno, each circle of hell is associated with a particular sin, and the punishments for these sins are often symbolic and specific. In the Legend of Zelda, like there's a different sub-levels of the dungeon and are associated with different enemies and obstacles, which could be really be interpreted as like representing different types of sin and spiritual challenges. But I really do see both journeys, both for Dante's Inferno and Link's journey through those dungeons in the original Zelda series, as a metaphor of like a spiritual journey, where one could overcome various obstacles and challenges in order to grow and progress. And as we continue to make the connection between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, everything feels like a loop. As far as the story connection, despite Hylia's power, as she may have returned in Tears of the Kingdom, based off what we've seen so far, the life forces begin to falter, which very well seems like the forces that Ganondorf has, or Ganon has, or whoever the figure is speaking at the time, as far as that force, it seems like a very I'm going to make you falter kind of force. Redeads damn sure make me falter, so I don't know what to say for people or creatures that actually have to face that shit head on. But I'm thinking the era as the goddess of Hylia in this time that's mentioned from the story from Skyward Sword, I'm wondering if that's actually just going to be King Demise from Skyward Sword, but its demise in Tears of the Kingdom, which could end up leading to Skyward Sword. So let me talk about that more. To take, it's probably going to take the created Triforce for himself. They very well may have found the Triforce, and he's going to get it himself, and he's going to wipe out everyone else in the process. Or he may make Ganondorf the conduit for it. I'm not entirely sure. We don't know if he was a creation of the golden goddesses, like the three goddesses, or from a different world entirely. Like, we really don't know. But the fact that dude said, I'm going, like, he's basically murdering without mercy, and that's basically leave no survivors. Demise could return in Tears of the Kingdom, and that could be his voice, or it could be Ganon's, or it could be the quote-unquote false prophets, if we retouch back on religion again. So Hylia ends up in Skyward Sword, raising the islands to the sky. And in the story told in Skyward Sword about the past that led to Skyward Sword, during the darkest hour, which you look at the trailer, looks like it's going to be a darkest hour at some point. It easily feels like there's going to be an all is lost moment in Tears of the Kingdom. It's begging for it. It's pleading for it. It's on its knees. But anyways, Hylia was forced, as far as Skyward Sword, forced to evacuate the survivors and the Triforce itself and raise them to the sky alongside the Hylia statue of the goddess, putting it out of Demise's immediate reach with her cloud barrier. And we see in Tears of the Kingdom there is a cloud barrier. We see that, there's random islands in the sky for whatever reason, and it very well could put something. And I'd imagine if you have sky islands, there's going to be some interesting shit there. Like, it's not going to be there just for funsies. It's not going to be like Breath of the Wild to where you have some really neat place and then there's like a fucking Korok seed or a spirit orb at the end of it. Like, no, there's going to be some serious shit when you got some fucking floating islands. So if we talk more about Skyward Sword, Hylia and the Goddess Sword. Hylia turns her attention back to the Demon King and his army in the Skyward Sword story. And the people rally around her, and the surface, or the people that are still on the surface, they rally to her defense. She gets the blade known as the Goddess Sword, which is basically, if I haven't said it already, it's the Master Sword before it became the Master Sword. The Master Sword as we know it now is broken, destroyed, pretty much shown in Tears of the Kingdom. Teaser is like, yeah, it's fucked up basically. In Skyward Sword, the Silent Trial allows Link, likely the Link that comes after the Tears of the Kingdom Link, and the Link that does the trial is the Skyward Sword specific Link, unless that Link time travels to Skyward Sword, because it does look like a different Link, but a couple of years have passed, so he could have just grown his hair out, or it could be Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time somehow Link. Like, who knows really. But anyways, the Faron region has the Ancient Sister in there, which allows the Reborn Link to upgrade the Goddess Sword into the Goddess Longsword. And then the Lanayru region has the Sand Ship, which allows it to upgrade to the Goddess White Sword and allows it. After that, in the Elden region, has the Fire Sanctuary that allows it to turn into the Master Sword, remade after being damaged against a battle against Demise, Ganondorf, Lich King Ganondorf, whichever one you want to call it, which could very well be the Demise or Ganon or Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom. The races stand with the goddess against the forces, which could very well be the races that are there, including possibly the Minish in the Sky Islands, and they could be with the Zonai, or they could be the residents that precede the Zonai. Just an interesting tidbit there. Like, Hylia was mortally wounded, according to the Skyward Sword story, which could be Zelda potentially dying in Tears of the Kingdom. I don't think she will, but you never know. Or it could be temporary death, and it could be rebirth. I mean, we've got the Ouroboros, so it could fit in that theme. So Link perhaps is not mentioned in the initial story told about the beginning of Hyrule, told in Skyward Sword intro for whatever reason. I think it was like a nameless hero, and it's probably going to be Link, of course, or at least a iteration of Link. And my guess for the Master Sword, I guess you could use like a Dragon Ball analogy. And that is my guess that the Goddess Sword looks so generic when you first come across it in Skyward Sword is, instead of it being completely destroyed like you see in Tears of the Kingdom, it just simply just rests in a depowered state. Think of it like if you saw Dragon Ball Z, or if you happen to have seen it. I'd be kind of surprised if anybody that views this channel haven't, but you never know. Anyways, there is a main character called Goku, and at some point he reaches these incredible transformation like levels, and Goku is explaining levels to one of the antagonists called Boo. And you can just place the Goddess Sword image here and change it as the sword powers up. You have your regular Saiyan, and that's what Goku is, the character from this other show. And then he powers up to Super Saiyan, which is a stronger version of the regular one. And then you have a Super Saiyan 2, which is basically an ascended Super Saiyan, which is a stronger version of the Super one. And then you've got Super Saiyan level 3. To me, the Goddess Sword is a Saiyan. The Goddess Longsword is a Super Saiyan. The Goddess White Sword is a Super Saiyan 2. And the Master Sword is a Super Saiyan 3, which Akira Toriyama, like, I know I'm trailing off here, but the Super Saiyan 3 is supposed to draw out every drop of potential from Saiyans. The Master Sword draws out every drop of potential from the Goddess Sword. Alright, but anyways, anime analogies aside, Hylia impaled Demise with an imprisoning spike known as the Sealing Spike. This made Demise the imprisoned in Skyward Sword. And then one day, Demise would return and the world would end. Could that be in Tears of the Kingdom? Who knows? The Goddess Sword was created by the goddess Hylia, who likely fixed the broken sword in Tears of the Kingdom. Or it was fixed in a way by something, perhaps the sword isn't as powerful at this point in time as it was when it was blessed and powered up back in Skyward Sword. This creating like a weird bootstrap paradox with the Master Sword's creation, baby. It's confusing, man. Again, if you are confused, time travel is very fucking confusing. And when you're dealing with time travel from multiple games from the same series that may be looping in and of itself, it's gnarly. It's so gnarly. Do not feel bad if you do not understand nor follow. Basically, what it's coming down to so far, everything loops within itself. Like there's just, and you know what? The fact that you have so many centric circles, like on the collector's edition of Tears of the Kingdom, it's just a bunch of small loops. And that's what I feel like. I feel like it's a bunch of small loops. You got your bootstrap paradox from Ocarina of Time. You got your bootstraps paradox from Zelda getting revived. She's putting herself in a crystal to be revived at a later date, even though she can see her. So at one point, there's two Zeldas from the same game, from the same timeline, in the same location. And then it's wild. You got the Master Sword that's possibly just creating itself. It's just being created over and over. And then you got the fact that the events of Skyward Sword that's being told to you, or at least from the story, is very well possibly, because of the islands floating into the sky, going to be Tears of the Kingdom leading into Skyward Sword, which is basically the entire timeline, because Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is supposed to be the quote-unquote end, allegedly, of the Zelda timeline, which means Skyward Sword being the very beginning, it's looping back into itself, but I digress. Then you have the Ancient Chosen Hero. We're going to try to flesh this out further. You have the Ancient Chosen Hero, and Ancient Chosen Hero is mentioned throughout Skyward Sword series, and an Ancient Chosen Hero who fought alongside Hylia in an ancient age. Think about that. What ancient age? What, where, when, what? This is all we know. It's just an ancient age, and it's left at that. And Skyward Sword's Link and Zelda stood atop of the Hylia statue to honor the ancient goddess and the chosen one in the beginning of the game, who fought alongside Hylia in a distant age, whatever that may be, which is all about perspective. It's if time is a straight line, or everything that happened before you is stated to be in the past, like what do you do to square this? How do you fit this circle into the square hole? It's so convoluted, and it very well could be because, or at least part of it is because, Hylia had two plans in Skyward Sword. Plan number one was Fi, who very well may make a return in Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not entirely sure, but Fi, or Fi, depending on how you want to say the character's name, was chosen to live inside the Goddess Sword, the emerald tablet placed on a pedestal in Skyward Sword allows the new Link, the Skyward Sword Link, to use it going forward to repower or just to reuse the sword. The second plan was Hylia to abandon her divine form and transfer her soul to the body of a mortal so she can use the Triforce, because the Triforce was designed by the gods. All of its power can never be wielded by one, so she had to become mortal to be able to use the Triforce, and then that combines the power of the three gods. So she just tried to do her own little, like a little loophole. And getting even more convoluted, you have Hylia, Link, and the Time Gate. So for the Time Gate that I had loosely mentioned earlier, the Skyward Sword reincarnation of Hylia left for the Temple of Time during this adventure. And in the Lanayru Desert, like to travel through a gate of time to a distant world or distant location, this world could be Hylia helping with Tears of the Kingdom, unless it's Midna helping, or from Twilight Princess, or the Zonai, or Midna in relation to the Zonai, or vice versa, when the statement of please lend him your power is heard. It could be that. It's very well could be one of those three. I feel like it can't help but just be one of those three. Note that this Temple of Time for Skyward Sword in this game is supposed to be an earlier version of the Temple of Time of Ocarina of Time, which is also the one from Breath of the Wild. But if the Ouroboros has anything to say about it, the Temple of Time of Skyward Sword is modeled after Breath of the Wild, which is modeled after Skyward. sword in an endless loop of self-reference. It's so wild. So this includes the statue of the goddess and Hylia in an endless loop of starting on Skyloft, falling to Earth, then rising back above again and again and again. And Link, when he finally makes it to the Gate of Time in Skyward Sword, like, he just awakened. The Gate of Time here works as a time machine, and it even looks similar to the color and hue that is like the Zonai and the Twilight Princess markings. Like, not only that, but look at Minda's outfit in her human form. So we haven't talked about Twilight Princess much, but let me tell you something. Look at her and her saucy, sexy, I got a crush on this fictional character human form, the true queen baddie. What do you see here? It looks just like the Gate of Time. When Link comes through the time gate, he appears in a place shortly after Hylia and her subjects fought against this freaky wildish bunch. Hylia's alleged plan A, is blue and speaks as if she is a device or a piece of technology. So hear me out on this. Fi, who is also blue and was chosen to be placed inside the sword, perhaps that's more Sheikah technology. Perhaps she is a Sheikah device, or it could just be magic, or it could be both. Or it could be when technology is so advanced compared to what others know, it's no different to the observer than magic. Like, Fi mentions how important the data she got from Link is to her. Fi says at the end of Skyward Sword, which, spoiler, but I guess not that much of a one. I've already warned you several times. May we meet again in another life. That's setting her up to be in another game. For sure. It's so open-ended, it's obvious. Another life. All of the Link incarnations are more or less Links in different lives. So it wouldn't be a surprise if she made a return here. Like, even, check this out. In one of the scenes where Link catches a massive fade, and by fade I mean he gets his ass beat, Fi, or the Master Sword, whichever one you want to call it, even glows after Link gets bodied and Zelda saves him in the Breath of the Wild at Fort Hotno. I think it's supposed to be the miracle at Fort Hotno in a past memory. You know what else is blue besides me? If you don't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and hip thrust that motherfucking subscribe button. It's appreciated. But what else is blue? The ancient robot energy and time shift stones are blue. The ones that are in Skyward Sword. From the technologically advanced past in Skyward Sword. That could very well just be the future of Tears of the Kingdom. What color have we seen before in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild? Whatever the race have we seen that's so technologically advanced? The Sheikah in Breath of the Wild. Who else would the past be? Like, remember the three goddesses created everything. How, what, where, when? Would there have been another technologically advanced past? I'm not sure. It just really just leads to the Sheikah. So guys, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Ouroboros also represents the Zelda timeline, and the centric circles all represent the different bootstrap paradoxes that happen within the series. The entire series is a representation of life and death, endings and rebirth, an endless loop, over and over, never ending. One creates the other creates the other. That's the conclusion that I'm coming to with this. And this also, of course, adds credence to the Revelations claim, especially the seventh seal. So, the Book of Revelation, equaling Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. This is going to be something that's a little more contentious, so feel free to bear with me. I hope you do enjoy the ride while we try to go over this. So, to get you caught up on the Book of Revelations, there is a pre-tribulation, a tribulation, and a post-tribulation. Pre-trib and post-trib are different views about the timing and the events described in the Book of Revelations, which the Book of Revelations is just the end of days for the Bible. It's the popcorn eater part of the Bible, basically, that people gravitate to the most because it's extremely fascinating. Like, these views are related to the belief in the rapture of the church, which is a term used to describe the idea of the believers being taken up into heaven before, during, or after a period of great tribulation. So for pre-tribulation, this view holds that the rapture of the church will occur before the tribulation period described in Revelation. And according to this view, like, people, or at least believers, will be taken up to heaven with Jesus and will be spared the worst part of tribulation. They won't get their ass beat like everybody else that, I guess, sinned too much. And then you have tribulation. This view holds that the rapture of the church will occur during the tribulation period. With this, believers will go through a period of great persecution and suffering, because, you know, it's always suffering with religion, more or less, or at least Western religions. It's a lot of suffering, but will be sustained by their faith in Jesus. So the tribulation period is seen as the time of judgment and purification leading up to the ultimate triumph of Christ over evil. So there's the standard tribulation, and then you have the post one. This one's just the views is that believers will go through the tribulation and will be caught up with Jesus at his second coming when he returns to his established kingdom on earth. Like, this view is just tribulation. It's just after the fact. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You got pre, during, and post. And then Tears of the Kingdom, what gets me is there's 7 heroines and then you plus one more, and then that one very well may be the time manipulator, or it may well be Hylia. I imagine the 8th heroine would be the busted one out of the 7 hero, or at least out of the 8 heroines total in Breath of the Wild. Those statues that are out in, like, I think east of Gerudo, the Gerudo town. And then you got the one that's in the Gerudo Highlands. That would be your 8th one, which for that one to be the super strange will make sense. That's why it would be in such a erroneous place. And the fact that that's moved so far from the rest of them, how the hell do you make that happen? It's something to think about. The world will end catastrophically as far as Tears of the Kingdom is what it looks like. It's looking very Armageddon-y. You have religious locations regarding, like, the book of Revelations. You got John is to get in, as far as Revelations, how it works, or at least how it's supposed to start or pop off, is John is to get in contact with like 7 churches in regards to what is going to go down. Link, you could say, is in Ocarina of Time, is to get in contact with the 7 temples in Ocarina of Time, where the timeline splits thanks to Zelda's actions, which may not have happened if Link didn't reach the temples. No final showdown, no happy ending, no sent back in time, no joy for Link. Really, there's really almost never joy for Link. But anyways, you have demons, devils, Satan, and then Demise emerges basically. So you probably have already drawn a comparison between Demise from Skyward Sword and the devil / Satan. I mean, Demise or Ganon, or whichever one you want to call them, you know, it's easily, it also stands for like the demon lord, the dark lord, as far as like Ganon's concerned. In the original, the very first Zelda game, Demise would basically be Satan or the devil. And you know, in Book of Revelations, the devil returns, and as Demise was banished in Skyward Sword in the beginning, that's not too much different than Satan being banished out of heaven. So Ganondorf could very well be the Antichrist, or Ganon could be the Antichrist, while Ganondorf can be the false prophet maybe. And then there's a false prophet in the Book of Revelations. And I mean, he leads the Gerudo on a very fucked up rough path through the Hyrulean royal family. Did not help though. They really didn't. They were actually pretty shitty. They very questionable actions, but I would say very shitty. So that didn't help. And akin to Muslims, Gerudo worshipped a different god, like the goddess of the sands in Ocarina of Time. Hylians thought of the goddess of the sands, or the goddess of the Gerudo, that they worshipped as an evil deity. And Europeans thought Muhammad, for example, was the Antichrist, an evil deity or Satan. So this feels not too far off. It really doesn't, because they, to specifically have in Hyrulean lore that the Hylians thought the god that the Gerudos worshipped was evil, it's too on the nose. It's really too on the nose. And Europeans thought that Muhammad was the Antichrist. The Pope thought that Martin Luther was the Antichrist, and Martin Luther thought the Pope was the Antichrist. And the English thought Napoleon was the Antichrist, and Hitler, and so on and so forth, basically. Like, everybody's the Antichrist. If you don't like them, or granted, if they do really fucked up things, then you could see him as the Antichrist, you know. Everybody's got their reasons. People believe that the Antichrist, which I guess you could say Ganondorf, is destined to face off against Jesus, which it would be Zelda and or Hylia, depending on which flavor you want to see her as. Many believe that when the Antichrist goes into the temple rebuilt by the Jews, proclaimed by God himself, that is supposed to be the last act, which could be Link staring at a blood moon in the trailer from a church looking piece of architecture, and it could be the Temple of Time rebuilt or being rebuilt. So just a little bit of an interesting tidbit there. Satan, as far as the Bible, is supposed to be the father of lies, which demise lies. Bars. Ganondorf is stated to be the master manipulator, or at least could be the master manipulator. In Twilight Princess, Ganon manipulates Zant, the self-proclaimed king of the Twilight Realm, and tricks him into invading Hyrule and laying the groundwork for Ganondorf's own return. In Skyward Sword, Ganon is not the primary antagonist, but he is alluded to as a figure of evil that manipulates Girahim, which would be Demise, the game's primary antagonist, and it's working into reviving Demise. In Oracle of Ages and in Oracle of Seasons, Ganon has manipulated the evil sorceress Varen and the General of Darkness, Onyx, into doing his bidding in order to obtain the power of the Triforce. And then you've got Yiga in Breath of the Wild, and they're used as henchmen. They're used as henchmen by Ganon. The Gerudo in Ocarina of Time and prior, in reality, I know it's just the Gerudo are just good people that were led astray at that time. Because in my view, is that due to some bad actions of the Hyrule royal family, much like in real life, they created enemies for themselves over the generations. The Gerudo way back when, the Sheikah way back when, and in the Breath of the Wild era, end up becoming, or at least factions of them, become enemies of the Hyrulean royal family. Not because they think it's fucking fun to do, they do it because the Hyrulean family did some pretty fucked up things. Like, you even have in Ocarina of Time, it's like, here lies Hyrule's history of bloodshed and hatred. That the hatred doesn't fall from nowhere. Anger and hatred leads more people to be more susceptible to manipulation. And in Ocarina of Time, or at least Ganon manipulates several characters, including Ganondorf himself, like his human form, who tricks Link into opening the door of time and releasing him from the sacred realm. And in Wind Waker, for example, Ganon manipulates Tetra, who is actually the reincarnation of Princess Zelda, by using mind control to force her to reveal the location of the Triforce. So it's super interesting that the Bible has the Antichrist as the master manipulator. Ganondorf is the master manipulator. And on a side note, I noticed that with the spirits in the mines in the Tears of the Kingdom trailer, the spirits can be seen in Twilight Princess in the Twilight Realm. Maybe that's a bit out there, but I feel like that's something worth noting. And regarding the Book of Revelations, we have, again, we're mentioning being whisked up to heaven, whatever. Anyways, you have characters, or at least people being sent up to heaven. We'll just say sent, because it's just fucking easier. Rapture. People whisked up. I tried it again. I failed. All right, sent up to heaven to escape the corruption on earth. What is floating in Skyward Sword? That'd be Skyloft. Where is it floating at? One on the ground, and would say it's heaven. The inhabitants no longer on the surface live in Skyloft, a la New Jerusalem, which is New Jerusalem is the promised land or whatever in the Book of Revelations, like safe from everything. It's a utopia akin to Skyloft. Like, I've been struggling this entire time. It could be God or it could be Jesus that's the stand-in, or at least Hiatus the stand-in for one of those two. It's a spectral figure surrounded by a bright light and 7 golden lampstands in the Book of Revelations. You also have a figure, a spectral looking figure, an otherworldly looking figure that is surrounded by 7 tiers in the trailer. You have for the book of Revelations, you have, as far as we could say, like the story beats. You have protruding from the mouth of I believe it's like is it the false prophet or the mark of the beast? There's one, or the beast. You have two-edged swords and like 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which you probably heard at the time. Now this could very well be a stretch. Who knows? What 4 monsters do you recall ending some of your favorite characters in Breath of the Wild? Well, maybe aside from Rivali. You have the 4 Blight Ganons. You have extraterrestrial body that is on a collision course with the world, which could be the Blood Moon. Now, granted, it could of course be the moon from Skyward Sword, from Majora's Mask, but the Blood Moon, considering the fact that it seems even more menacing than it did in Breath of the Wild, it could very well be on a fated collision course, like a very end of days thing. And considering the fact that you have red, which could be malice, could be fire, could be a mixture, whatever. You have fire, we'll call it fire, falling from the sky, items falling from the sky, which is just like Tears of the Kingdom trailer, to the falling fire that's coming, or at least from the direction of the Blood Moon. And then you have 4 strange multi-eyed beasts as far as the Book of Revelations, or the freakish, biblically accurate angels. Then you've got the lion, the ox, a human, eagle with 6 wings, along with like full eyes, like just a ton of eyes, just a needless amount of eyes. Like I guess it's supposed to be all seeing eyes or all seeing, but I know it freaks me right the fuck out. And then you have lamb that has 7 horns and 7 eyes, and it could be the Lamb of God, which looks slain much like Jesus was slain, and has the 7 seals. The apocalypse is right underway. So you have 7 circular patterns in the Sheikah eye in Breath of the Wild, and then you have 7 bowls. Those could be the bowls from a like top-down view. Then you have the beast. The beast could be interpreted, I would say, as Ganon. Then you have giant red dragons, like with 7 heads and 10 horns. And then you have the Archangel Michael, who kicks the ass of the dragon, which Link could be the Archangel. Honestly, who knows? Like, I'm really just asking questions here. Then you have 7 heads on the next beast with 10 horns. 1 head is wounded for some reason. The beast talks shit on God to people who just happen to still be around during the Armageddon stage. The earth opens up, and the false prophet, the Antichrist, tells everyone that is still around the dragon beast is pretty damn cool. And notice the earth opens up. Earth opens up. Earth opens up. Earth tends to open up a lot when shit goes down. So he shows little magic tricks to make them believe in him, in the false prophet. And then you have the whole, that's where the 666 comes from, the mark of the beast or whatever. Basically, it's to tell you where that 666 came from. It's basically like a code for Emperor Neo, who was like a huge dick in olden times. That's really just what that is. But it's just adopted for the Bible. So the multi-headed dragon, Satan is locked up for 1,000 years, basically, after getting bopped. The other 3 beasts, the Antichrist, which could be Ganondorf, the other beasts, are thrown into hell. And then Jesus rules over Earth for like another 1,000 years, who could be Hylia or Zelda, who knows, Link maybe. Anyways, 1,000 years pass, Satan is released, then Satan gets bopped again, or at least the creature known as Satan is cast into hell. And then, of course, you got the number 7s and Revelations. In the Silent Realm, back in Skyward Sword, which is an ethereal realm that can only be inhabited by figures known as the Guardians, which those things kind of freaked me out when I played it. To complete separate trials for Link that must collect the sacred tears. And you can't help but just pause there and think about that. There are 7 tiers in Tears of the Kingdom's trailer. Are they the salvation of an omen of doom, or they more to interact with? Like, I just don't know. Does that bring Hyrule one step closer to the apocalypse? I just don't know. But there are 7 seals as far as the book of Revelations. You have 7 tiers, 7 seals. Seal 1, there's supposed to be like a man on a white horse with a bow and a crown, and that's the embodiment of conquest. You have seal 2. Oh, and as these seals are broken, they lead you closer to the apocalypse. So seal 2, there's a man with a large sword on a red horse, and that's the embodiment of war and conquest. Seal 3, you have a man on a black horse and with a weighing scale, and that's the embodiment of famine. You have seal 4, a rider on a pale horse, the embodiment of death. Then you have seal 5, and that seems to be more of like a dud, because it's a nice white robes given to martyrs, and they're just told to raid around. There's not much to do with this seal 5. And then seal 6, I guess with seal 5, honestly, as I think about it, seal 5 could be, because they're just given like nice duds and outfits. I mean, they're getting like a fresh fit. Seal 5 could just be the Breath of the Wild champions given their garbs. Funny enough, but you know, I'm just spitballing. So seal 6, there's nasty giant earthquakes destroying mountains and islands, making the sky turn black. Interacting with the 6th tier, much like the 6th seal, could signal coming worse natural disasters. I imagine if Link is to collect these tiers, and the more tiers you collect, I imagine more shit is going to go down. So the stars of the sky fell to earth, and stuff falling to earth in the Tears of the Kingdom trailer. That could be another semblance of that. As each seal is broken on the timeline, we move closer to destruction, and I think that thematically would be super cool. For a game that we've waited for like 6 years or so to finally play, yeah, I think that would be sick to have as a thing. Earthquakes, darkness, and meteorite impacts. Seal 7, it is believed that the opening of the 7th seal will bring about the end of the world. The freaky creatures that I mentioned earlier, the ox, the eagle, the human, the lion, they get a break from praising God. And it stops for like half an hour specifically for whatever reason. It's possible as Link comes into contact with the Tears of the Kingdom that I mentioned, it really signifies that the end is drawing closer. Or it could be the fact that these 7 tiers are part of the story, that the 7th seal is already broken, or the 7th tier is already involved. Satan, who I guess you could say is Demise, who is Calamity Ganon, who is Ganon, will wage war against man, much like the 7th seal. So the 7th seal and technological advances here, this is something that I've thought about when I saw that old cutscene from Breath of the Wild. So the 7th seal mentions we would see great technological advances. The past tech in Skyward Sword was extremely advanced. So is the tech in Breath of the Wild. You have the robots that were in Skyward Sword who were so advanced, and it seems to have emotions. They had their own fear, grief, anger, so on and so forth. The only people likely to have made them at the time, especially with the color scheme, the blue color scheme, are the Sheikah. Breath of the Wild Age of Calamity truly showcased time travel capabilities of the Sheikah. That was Sheikah technology, that time travel. I know it's not necessarily supposed to be canon, but the main purpose of the Time Gate in Skyward Sword was to find Zelda to be the vessel of the goddess Hylia, to find Link for his fight against Demise. Gods don't perceive time the same way that us mortals do. When you can see time the same way we see in 3D, then you can see what will happen before it does. So you can go grocery shopping for your pawns. Heroes. We'll call them heroes. They're still pawns. My guess is that the time stones allow you in Skyward Sword to see some of the technological advances of the past, which is the future, which would be referring to the advances made leading up to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. No other points showcased being as advanced as the tech from this era regarding the Guardians, the Sheikah tech, and in general, like the shrines, the towers, and the divine beasts. Remember, Purist technology reversed aging. Not only did it reverse aging, because you have to do this whole thing, you'd have to actually correctly remove cells and atoms from the body. You'd have to add telomeres back. So the bone mass that you would have from being an adult person versus being a child, you're reversing all of that. You're erasing, you're de-dividing. It's nuts. You're de-dividing cells to put them back together without having any duplicates. They're being fused back together. She reversed aging to where she looks like a little kid. Well, she is a little, not looks like a little kid, she is a little kid. It's just nuts. You have ancient furnaces with seemingly endless energy, like nuclear fission would be. You have time manipulation, basically manipulating the super states of matter on a subatomic level, and it's superposition in space and time. Like weapons, you have weapons of mass destruction. Like, it's insane the level of technological advances that the Sheikah have. The Zonai and the Sheikah tech is insane at this point. I cannot stress that enough. The Zonai possibly being related to the Twilight makes this not surprising, as they are likely banished Sheikah from the Twilight realm in Twilight Princess. And our world and technological advances can give even more light on this. People like to say we ourselves are at the end times. Granted, people have always said that for like a long ass time, but much like Zelda's world, at what point did we have, and by extension Hyrule, have technology capable of wiping out most of, if not all, civilization? We've had this capability for decades now, and the Zelda universe up to Tears of the Kingdom have had this tech for possibly thousands of years. Why do you think the royal family of Hyrule, namely the king, ordered the divine beast to be buried and the Sheikah to give up their technology? It was fear of mass destruction. Imagine if another Hyrulean civil war broke out. It's basically MAD, which is mutually assured destruction in our world. Even worse, if Ganon takes a hold of them again with our world, we've had several close calls, really close calls. We've had computer glitches that alerted the US that there were like 200 intercontinental ballistic missiles from the Soviet Union heading to the United States, but it was a computer glitch, we come to find out, and that crisis was averted. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis. All it took was one man with a cooler head to prevail. Otherwise, we would not be here. None of us. Crisis averted. We've had Stanislav Petrov, which was the man who literally saved the world from nuclear annihilation. Crisis averted. A bomb that did not detonate in the US that fell and hit the ground without exploding. It was a nuclear bomb on US soil. Crisis averted. The only reason anyone listening to this is still alive also was due to a former fisherman defeating a genocidal regime of Yahya Khan, as there was like a US, at the time there was a US ship with 2,000 times the firepower of nukes that were dropped on Hiroshima, and they were headed to a no-go zone with Russia. Meanwhile, Russia had several subs with nukes as a countermeasure. If the farmers didn't win, who knows what would happen? Crisis averted. Time and time again, we've been lucky, but as the stretch of the universe bends, eventually our luck may run out. I think the king knew this and anticipated this, because we think about it in Breath of the Wild, it's like, man, this paranoid fuck. But he might have been spitting. He's quite wise, but not surprising considering the connection to the royal family's daughters tend to have the Triforce of Wisdom. I mean, if you're going to be in the vicinity of Goddess Hylia, who, is connected Zelda with the Triforce of Wisdom, it's very likely that that wisdom is going to rub off on you in close proximity. That, and I mean, King Robe contributed the goo, the baby goo that the baby goo that made Zelda, so it's really not that surprising. And then there are 7 trumpets regarding the Book of Revelations. Trumpet 1 is fire and hail rain down to earth. While fire rages, 1/3 of the vegetation is gone. Trumpet 2, mountain-sized object falls into the sea, turning 1/3 of the sea into blood, which that's fun. Killing 1/3 of the innocent creatures as well. That's not really fair, but I don't think the Book of Revelations really cares about fair. Trumpet 3, you have wormwood star falls to Earth's rivers and contaminates the world's fresh water supply and makes it undrinkable and toxic, like there already wasn't shit going down. And then Trumpet 4, the sun goes out again, though it went out in the sixth seal, so I'm not sure why it's going out again. I guess it forgot something, came back, and then left again. Who knows? And then you got Trumpet 5. You have a strange angel that descends to Earth and heads to the bottomless pit, or to a bottomless pit, and opens it, causing like giants, locusts, and plagues and to descend onto the Earth. They sting people, but people are just unable to die, even if they wanted to. Like it's very sadistic. Then you got Trumpet 6, which has 4 angels come to kill 1/3 of the humans' population, because goddamn, they weren't already suffering enough. And then you got Trumpet 7, which is hymn for those in heaven. An army of Satan will wage war against man in the 7th seal. And then, of course, there's 7 bowls, because we're not done with the number 7, and we have to mention it again. So this time I'm actually going over the 7th bowl. So bowl 1 is painful sores and boils for everyone, still there. Bowl 2 is a whole sea of blood, because we haven't seen enough sea of blood. We got 1/3 of a sea of blood. Now we need to just fill it out. And then you've got bowl 3, all fresh water turned into blood. I mean, because we haven't got enough blood again. And then you have bowl 4, which scorches people on Earth with the hot sun, which it's something because the sun supposedly went out. So the sun went out, but it's also still scorching us, which, God, come on, man. Enough. Bowl 5, you have political instability and darkness, which, honestly, political instability should have happened before bowl 1. I mean, hell, we have political instability at bowl 0. But anyways, bowl 6, the river in Iraq specifically is to dry up. Specifically. Okay. Bowl 7, you have Armageddon. You have lightning, and you have hailstones and earthquakes. That shit's really gonna start to finally pop off. And I really feel like Skyward Sword is connected to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, because even before it came out, Ayanuma reportedly had talked about, because he had went on stage during an Osaka concert. I can't remember exactly what the concert was about in full, but it was even mentioned. He was like, "Are you sure you don't want to ask about the Switch version of Skyward Sword?" So I really feel like there's going to be a connection there too. And Skyward Sword could very well just be the aftermath, that New Jerusalem after Tears of the... And just to pile on top of what Ayanuma said regarding Skyward Sword, you have to think too, remember he promised, or at least he said, that the latest Zelda game, which before the name was given, Tears of the Kingdom, is supposed to be darker than Majora's Mask. And Majora's Mask is beyond unsettling, to say the least, from top to bottom. To beat that, you're gonna have to really pull out the stops. And what is one of the darkest, most unsettling stories in human fiction? I know I said fiction, please not get mad at me. The Book of Revelations. Or I guess you could say in human history, whatever. The Book of Revelations. So for the aftermath of the Book of Revelations and Tears of the Kingdom, the Book of Revelations in the Bible is like the last book in the New Testament, and it describes the end of days, which is final judgment. It doesn't provide like a detailed account of what happened to humans after the events it describes, but it does suggest that those who have been faithful will come out just fine, while those who have rejected God will face eternal punishment, which is kind of fucked up because you give them free will, but if they don't do what you want, then you kick their ass. Like that's not what? That's fucked up. Anyways, critiques aside, Ganon rejects Hylia, and Ganon gets eternal punishment throughout the games. The people that are faithful, Skyloft awaits them. All the while, the faithful servants also fight the demon army, and in the original Zelda, Ganon is meant to represent Satan. So my conclusion for all of this is, even Zelda says in the Tears of the Kingdom trailer, it's like, Link, I'm not sure you'll be able to stop him. It's pretty hard for even Link to stop Armageddon. So my theory overall, these 3 games are a trilogy, and part of the Triforce. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Wisdom for the adult timeline. Power for the fallen timeline. Courage for the child timeline. Courage also being related to Jesus through courage through faith. Power being the fact that there's more Christian overtones in the fallen timeline related to God. And the adult timeline would be Zelda, which blue for wisdom. Skyward Sword, the Triforce of Power, which would be red. Breath of the Wild, its central color is the Triforce of Wisdom, which would be blue. And Tears of the Kingdom, the central color is green, Triforce of Courage. If you don't count Age of Calamity as a what if, the purposeful split obtained by the gods. Timelines are fractured realities, or at least that's the way I also like to look at them. It's just like Schrodinger's cat. In one reality, the cat is alive, and in the other reality, well, sad days. Each of the three timelines, to me, represents a facet of the Triforce. Each timeline is where one particular part of the Triforce has taken over the other aspects. In the Downfall timeline, the power is the heaviest influence. Ganon wins the reality where the Triforce of Power is representation at its strongest influence. Power corrupts absolutely, and it brings decline to Hyrule. As power tends to do what it does, power corrupts absolutely. So this represents complete command of the Triforce of Power. The demand, or at least the Downfall timeline, seems to have the most vicious enemies, and judging by Link's power, those have been some of the strongest Links as a result. Because number one, he's fighting stronger enemies, and number two, I'd imagine that everyone, to random degrees, some more than others, are going to be more influenced by the Triforce of Power. So that could very well just make all creatures in the Downfall timeline, it could give them a buff, basically. It won't seem like that because everyone is stronger in this universe, but if you could put them compared to the other universes, the other timelines, they've got an amp. So the timeline of power stars Ganon, which is the fallen timeline where power has overtaken wisdom and courage, and it focuses on holding back focuses on holding back the power of darkness and prevailing against overwhelming odds to save the day from a seemingly unstoppable evil. And then you got the child timeline. The courage influence is the strongest influence here. The reality where the Triforce of Courage and its representation is the most influential. The timeline of courage is where Link came into his full power and then stopped both Zelda and Ganon from realizing their full potential in the past. And it basically just stars Link. Like, it's his actions which decide the game and the outcomes, and it's more focused around fighting new enemies and finding new ways to adventure. Like Termina, it's a story, the dark world, beastly monsters, turning into a wolf, adventuring with friends, so on and so forth. It's more exploration, more experimental, more you're finding new things. And then you've got the adult timeline, which is the heaviest wisdom influence. So in this timeline, this would also reflect the imperfect wisdom of a mortal, despite starting off as a literal god. This would help explain why Ganondorf is wiser in the Wind Waker when you think about it. Because granted, maybe he's just wiser because he's been around longer and here, but it could be the case that the gods ordained it after all, because they do, or at least according to Zelda lore, they do have everything written out. The timeline of wisdom, Zelda stands alone with no holder of the power of courage left in power, or at least in her timeline, or this particular timeline. So Zelda is the main focus. And it focuses more on new ideas and societal changes, like the age of the sail on the DS, and the hints at the Industrial Revolution with like Spirit Tracks, the founding of New Hyrule after the the Noah's Ark flood. This would also explain seeing technological advances as what comes with wisdom. So, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is where the light starts leading into Skyward Sword. Ocarina of Time is the prism where the light fractures out. You got red, you got green, you got blue. These colors are all the primary compounds of white light, and that's a prismed reality. It's completely logical that these colors were chosen to represent like the virtues of the Triforce. It is, after all, the source of divine light, which would be just your standard white holy light. Like the gods transcend time. Maybe they're just curious to see how things play out by seeing what happens when one piece of the Triforce is unbalanced, as it breaks when it's in the hands of someone whose heart is unbalanced. When one piece has greater influence or wins out over the other two, putting together either by force or by orchestrating the timeline splits back together. So you have a point where the Zora and the Rito exist in the same timeline. If each Triforce ideal has the most influence on Hyrule at any given point, but it leads back to a singularity, like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Book of Revelations, beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, it all just wraps up together. Which, like how the Book of Revelations is considered by many Christians to be a part of God's plan as revealed in the Bible, the Revelations seemingly end of days vibe that Tears of the Kingdom gives is all part of the Gods of Hyrule's plan. Which technically you could say is yes, because much like Jack Kirby was the one above all at one point in the Marvel continuity, Aonuma is the one above all for Hyrule, as he stands above even the gods of Hyrule, deciding how everything plays out, even letting players to some degree hold divine power over Hyrule, if you really think about it from top down. The Zelda timeline reality really, to me, is an endless loop. You have the sages of Twilight Princess remarking that Ganondorf getting the Triforce of Power just before being executed, it was a divine prank. But really, the fact that the timeline starts all over again and these creatures without their knowledge will suffer in an endless cycle again and again and again and again, perhaps for all eternity, actually, is the most cruel divine prank of them all. Like, these gods transcend time. Like, they aren't bound by the laws of time. They can move throughout the space as they see fit. Much like how we can move in a 3D space, they can move in a 4D space, or even potentially greater dimensions, as they would walk to the next room to get like a snack. But in Genesis and Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the Exodus or Revelations, or it could be one after the other. I can't tell if the chicken came before the egg or the egg came before the chicken with this. But the death of Hyrule, which will lead to its rebirth, could be New Jerusalem. The Ouroboros, death and rebirth, never-ending cycle. Just as Demise said, perhaps Demise curse is the reason that the Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom exists in the first place, to make the loop eternal, to make it forever. But just as the gods designed, the flow of time is always cruel, so the cycle just starts all over again. The flow of time is always cruel is the quote that Sheik makes in Ocarina of Time, and I've always kept that close to my heart, because goddamn, that is to me it's a horrifying statement. It's because it's true. The flow of time ends up being very cruel. As long as you're alive, something bad is going to happen, and if you're forced to relive those sad, tragic events, that's even crueler. Breaking that curse, defeating Demise's curse somehow could allow, if it is Demise's curse, a break in the timeline to allow it to continue on, where Skyward Sword is actually the past for a different timeline. But the timeline where Link and Zelda fail to break free, not even to just win in combat, but to fail to break the endless cycle, it all starts over again in an endless loop Demise devised. I personally do not know if Demise supersedes the gods, or do they stand at similar levels of powers, or are the gods who created Hyrule truly the ones that are above all? Like, are they truly the supreme beings? They are so far above it all that they may not even be beings, just abstract concepts like the power, wisdom, courage. Maybe there are gods above them, like in eternity, a supreme law, something that governs the Hyrulean universe and all multiverses. But people like their happy endings. It depends on what Daddy Nintendo says ultimately, and Daddy Ayanuma. Some of us like tragedy in our stories, some of us like happy endings for whatever reason. Plenty of blues on the news all the time, so I can't really blame people for wanting a happy ending to their story. But if the Zelda team is sticking to or taking inspiration from sources I think it's taking from, I don't expect this story to end well for the current Breath of the Wild era residents. Afterwards, sure, but not in this game. It's Armageddon, the end of Hyrule's world, the end of Hyrule's timeline before it loops and begins again as a new utopian city, Skyloft basically, just like the Bible. But it could branch again. It could branch into a different timeline where the bad ending loops into the rest of the timeline. One timeline loops back into Skyward Sword. The other timeline continues on. I'm aware how crazy multiverse theory can get and how technically we could have an infinite multiverses and timelines based on seemingly infinite number of actions, but I'm going by the established Zelda key instances and its timeline logic because it will make the rest of your brain bleed, even though your brain should already be bleeding at this point. Link could be a Jesus figure, like, who knows really? But Link being Jesus, I mean, they both resurrect after being hidden away and buried, because Link comes out of literally the Shrine of Resurrection. Both had sages and apostles. They both helped random people of the lower class. They both have to walk far distances. Less people were where they came from than Westerners, which I don't know, it could be. But of course, there's some discrepancies. Like you do have the ancient dragon bones in Breath of the Wild, as far as like continuity's sake. You have dragon bones in the desert and in the Hebra region, and the like to contend with. But like one way you could look at it is Demise's curse doesn't extend to every single creature in Hyrule. Maybe the gods forced them together, like if they forced the timelines together. Perhaps Hyrule is their experiment. Like this is a super interesting thing to me. Perhaps it's their experiment. There could be slight deviations that would be a lot even for a god to orchestrate, happening endlessly in a loop down to a subatomic level. Same everything, same time, same place, same superposition in space. I don't know the full extent of Demise's power or what. Like, is he a god or a powerful being from another world like Marvel Comics Beyonders? They weren't gods, but they had the power to completely crush Marvel's gods, aside from the one above all. And the Living Tribunal, who is right below the one above all, got his ass thrashed across multiverses by creatures outside of the main universe. Could Demise be one of those creatures that are just like a hateful dick that's just that strong? Like, we don't know. Side note, I guess Shigeru Miyamoto could be the one above all, which, like, that'd be much like Jack Kirby in Marvel. So I'm raising the question to you all. This is just my interpretation. Like full disclaimer. Remember, my theory is that the Zelda team is taking inspiration from past Zelda games, Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, the original Zelda's origins in Christianity, and Studio Ghibli films, Mesoamerican culture, and potentially even the Bible. And if it's not, it's damn sure a lot of coincidences. And this means to me that Tears of the Kingdom spells doom for Hyrule as it currently stands. It's very possible the stories being so old lead to misinterpretations, like Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again. But what do you think? Tell me what you think in the comments down below. You can tell me, it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, wow, I didn't even think of that. Or, hey, casual, shout out for talking about this thing for so damn long. If you want more of this kind of content or anything else that you might enjoy, click the video over there, and I hope to catch you around later. Peace.